Essayist and novelist Gore Vidal is one of the best-known literary figures in America. He was part of the circle of great young writers who dominated America's cultural scene in the wake of the Second World War. His diverse works, ranging from historical novels to political and literary essays, share the common thread of his signature wit and biting satire. Vidal's Palimpsest is the memoir that he said he would never write, and I am pleased to have him here to talk about it now that he has written it. Welcome. Now, let me just go back over definition. I'd asked you this before. Palimpsest?
Palimpsest. Everybody said, oh, why did you pick a word nobody knows? They'll be embarrassed in the bookstores. They can't remember it.
Yeah.
But it's such a nice word. It says very clearly a memoir,
right,
which is the world as I remembered it, which does not mean that it is perhaps all that accurate, but its memories is very inaccurate. Hence the title Palimpsest, because it means in the 17th century they take a parchment, they'd write something on it, then they'd erase part of it and write something else over it and write something. So you get different layers. Well, that's how memory works. Yeah. Memory is one layer upon another.
We looked up the definition: paper, parchment, prepared for writing on and wiping out again, like a slate, a parchment which has been written upon twice, the original writing having been rubbed out. And so that, hence that, this cover, is that part of...
The cover, well, I stopped at the age of 39. I don't want to give the impression I still look like that. That was taken 35 years ago when I was 35. Yeah. I've just turned 70. Yeah. I remember when Mary McCarthy turned 70. Somebody said, what does it feel like, Miss McCarthy, to be 70? She said, I feel just as usual, but I don't like the way I look.
So is that the way you feel?
Very fair answer, yes.
Yeah, but you've done pretty well, my friend. I mean, you know, well, age has, as someone even noted in one of the reviews I read, that Gore looks pretty good.
Well, that's because 70. I've become a movie star. I took that up in my late 60s, and now that I'm 70, I'm working with, co-starring with Charlie Sheen in a movie.
What's the new movie?
It's called The Shadow Conspiracy.
Yeah, this comes out of your experience with Tim Robbins?
With Tim Robbins and Bob Roberts, and then I was in a picture with Joe Pesci.
Yeah.
Called
what was
With
that?
Honors. With Honors. And, oh, I love acting.
Do you?
Well, you don't think about anything while you're doing it. Your brain just goes blank. Yeah. And I have rather high blood pressure, and mine's absolutely normal while I act because the adrenaline gets burned up. So it's very easy for me. If I had talent, it would be extremely difficult. But as I have absolutely none, I just walk through
what was it called?
Bob Roberts.
Bob Roberts. I mean, that was mainly you, didn't they? They just put the camera on you. I mean, it was not a scripted monologue. It was...
That was Tim Robbins as the director, writer, star.
Well, his words or your words?
Mine. Yeah, well, at the end, he said, why don't you stay over a day and we'll do a shot with you. You know, after you've lost the election to this evil person played by Tim Robbins, demagogue. So I thought a little bit about Pat Moynihan. I even had a little bow tie on. Yes. And so Tim would fire me questions as if he were an interviewer, and I'd invent the answers on the spot. And it was a joy to do, because with an empty head, you don't know what's going to come out, and they can always edit it later if something that should not come out does come out. So that gave me a little second career here.
So you and Fred Thompson, you know, it could lead you to the United States Senate. Fred Thompson, as you know, had an acting career, a lawyer, and he is now the junior senator from Tennessee.
Well,
so that career
I want to say that he is my role model, but actually it's Ronald Reagan.
Yes. There's a great picture in here in which I want to show. Oh, this is it. Can you come in on this? Here is you with Tennessee Williams has his hand around your shoulder, and there is JFK. Tell me about the two of them.
Well, I got a call from Jackie. I was writing the movie of Suddenly Last Summer in Miami, and Jackie rang and said, can you come up for lunch to Palm Beach? That Jack is, we're both dying to meet Tennessee Williams, so we came up, and this was about 1957, and Jack's already running for president, but Tennessee is very, very vague about who's who. He gives it, now, are you a senator or a governor? I can't get this very clear. And I said, I'm a senator. Mm. And he said, then they kept on chatting away, and then Jack pulled out some guns, and he was shooting at a target. Yeah. And said, would you like to take a shot? In Palm Springs. Oh, right on that lawn where the alleged rape case was to take place.
Beach, not Palm Springs. Palm Beach.
Palm Beach. And so Jack was shooting away, not terribly effectively, and he gave the gun to Tennessee, who took it like that. He was not called Tennessee for nothing. He just took it like that and went 3 bullseyes. Jack said, well, that's very good. And Tennessee said, yes, and considering I was using my blind eye. Then as Jack was going in the house, Tennessee said, that's a very attractive boy. I said, Tennessee, you cannot cruise the next president of the United States. Oh, he said, he's not going to be president. He's much too attractive for the American people. Later, I told Jack that Tennessee had found him attractive sexually, and Jack said, that's very exciting.
Why did you stop this when you did? Why only age 39?
Well, it would get so long. I mean, I've had a long life and started. My first book was published when I was 19, 20.
Yeah.
So I've been around such a long time that by 39...
So this is like part 1. I mean, there'll be another
There might be a part
two.
2, or there might not be a part 2, but practically everything that happens to you in life happens. You know, it's really happened by 25.
Yeah, you say that. I mean, I want to come back to that point, but you say this is memoir and not a biography because?
Because it's the way the memory works. And if you break your leg, let's say when you're 10 years old and you're now 60 years old, and you start to remember the trauma of breaking your leg, this is this interesting thing from the brain people, that neurologists, that you don't remember the actual trauma. You remember the last time you remembered. And that time, you were remembering the previous time you remembered, and previous. Well, each time it gets a bit altered. Hence, a palimpsest. One thing is being written over another.
Right.
So ultimately, your memory is just what you're left with, a whole series of layers. And as you investigate it, you see, well, some things are true and some things can't be true. Then I check myself against all these, everybody I know seems to have had a dozen biographies written about him, so I read about myself in these books. And that certainly spurs memory, as I have to give my side of the case.
But memoir rather than biography, because biography also has to be more factual, and in a memoir you've got to be more historical.
And you've got to get your facts straight and so on, and the dates. And I don't even bother with any of that. It's just if I recollect something like the story I just told you about Tennessee and the gun in Palm Beach, that's really what's left of it to me.
Some have said that you used this to get even with Truman Capote and with Aeneas Nin and with...
That was only one reviewer here in New York City, somebody who should be put out to pasture almost immediately as we speak.
Put out to pasture?
Well, he's old, and
No, I know him. He's not that old. He's a nice man.
Oh, come on now. He must be about 80 now.
No,
he's been
not 80.
Well, I know he gave Washington Irving a bad review, and that was 1810. No, he's absurd.
But I mean, did you use this? I mean, it's not beyond you to use these musings and memoirs to...
Well, it's not beyond anybody to use to make your case, perhaps. But to answer questions, if you have opposed, as I have, a political system as thoroughly and doggedly and continuously the financial system of the United States, the people who own the media are the people who own the country, and they don't like what you say. So they try to ignore you. If that doesn't work, they begin to demonize you or trivialize you.
And so you're saying that the New York Times wants to demonize you and trivialize you?
In principle. And for nearly, for 6 books, I was blacked out by the New York Times. This is after
blacked out, meaning they didn't review them?
They would not review anything in the Daily Times, nor did Time, nor did Newsweek. I was then driven, and it's sort of the center of this book, I was then driven. In order to make a living, since my books were not being reviewed, I went into television, the movies, and the theater.
You know, I never realized you wrote the screenplay for Ben-Hur. Not only Suddenly Last Summer, but Ben-Hur.
Yes, indeed, I did. But didn't get credit.
Because and that was Charlton Heston?
He had nothing to do with it. You see, this is what happens when you read this guy in the Times. Right. He says, I am angry at Charlton Heston.
Right.
Charlton Heston, to me, I mean, I start to smile when I talk about him. I mean, he is the greatest goose on earth.
The greatest goose?
Goose, yeah. I mean, I was denied credit on it. He had nothing to do with it. He never knew who wrote the scripts. The producer knew, Sam Zimbalist, and he died. So it was all up in the air, and William Wyler, a very nice guy, the director, wanted Christopher Fry, the other writer, and myself as co-writers. I only brought it up because it ended in great lawsuits and changed the rules of the Writers Guild of America. Heston then wrote about me in his diaries, so I make some fun of him.
What does he say about you?
Oh, I don't know. Well, he keeps redoing it, so I don't know what it is lately.
He does have new memoirs out. I want to show you two people. One, this is Jimmy Trimble, as he looked the last time I saw him when he was 17 in 1942. What I was not, he was, and the other way around. Just reflect on this, because this is at the heart of this book.
Well, we grew up together, and I was 1 week older than he, and we went to school together. He was the greatest athlete in the school, and I was already a writer. And the one thing we had in common was that we were already, as schoolboys, we were what we were going to be all our lives. I was going to be a writer. By the time he was 17 and graduated from St. Albans, he was offered a contract with the New York Giants as a pitcher, something that's never happened to a 17-year-old before. Yeah. And by 19, my first book was published. We had that in common, and it was a kind of wholeness. We were like two parts of the same person. And then we were separated by time and war. At 17, I enlisted in the infantry and then got sent out to the Aleutian Islands, by which time I was the first mate of a ship. I'd moved over to the Transportation Corps. He enlisted in the Marines, and 50 years ago, last March, he was killed at Iwo Jima. So as I said to one interviewer once, this was sort of the unfinished business of my life. Not that there was anything that of a prurient nature. It was two halves of the same whole, which would have adjusted, as I say in the book. I said I had no idea of growing old with him. I just wanted to go on growing up with him. And he had a girlfriend, and he was all set to get married as soon as he got back.
But how were you the mirror images of each other? How were you twins? How were you? I mean, you were a writer. He was an athlete.
Well,
you both were attractive young men. You both were obviously bright. You both were full of life.
Well, isn't your question the answer to it? That each saw in the other what he was not, and that there was a sort of balance between the two. In the Symposium, Plato writes about it. And he said that, as Aristophanes said at this dinner party, and Aristophanes tells the story about, originally there were three sexes. There was a hermaphrodite, male, female. Round, must have been rather unpleasant looking, these three. And they angered Zeus the god, so he split the hermaphrodite in half, which means that every boy looking for a girl and every girl looking for a boy, they're actually looking for the completion of themselves, which had been bisected rather, by Zeus. Ditto the case of the male, ditto the case of the female. Each looks for the complementary half to a whole. I don't think anybody does it consciously. I certainly didn't. And I don't think if you search for it, you would find it. Either something like that happens in life, and it can be quite unexpected, with the most unexpected person. Then there it is. And that, to me, as I was writing this memoir, it became clearer and clearer to me that this was the story I was telling, 50 years dead, and, you know, we writers have great vanity, from the great Shakespeare down to me, and Shakespeare in the sonnets was making it very, very clear that he could make someone immortal that he cared about. Well, I don't know if I can make anyone immortal, but I can bring him back to life, which I did. I had researchers out there. I was getting reports from Marines who had served with him in the Pacific, talked to his mother, talked to the girlfriend, and suddenly I've brought a ghost back. And it was rather nice. It was, shall we call it exorcism? I don't know, but it was unexpected. So that is what palimpsesting led me to, and rather a surprise.
You have never met anyone who made you feel the same way, that made you reach this wholeness?
No, because, and I don't think I, like so many people, was always in youth. I was into lust. I was not into real entanglements.
And in fact, you say that's the best part of it.
Well, lust and the idle encounter was exactly what I liked. Jack Kennedy liked, Tennessee Williams, and Marlon Brando. Yeah, I mention all four of us because we're more or less contemporaries. And we were both promiscuous to a degree that is not possible in the age of AIDS, but we certainly were. It may have been the tension of the war, I don't know what. So neither one of us was looking for completeness. We were looking for the excitement and the adventure. The example of my own family put me totally against marriage. My mother was an alcoholic, and I couldn't wait to get out of her company. And except for one episode where I nearly got married, I was never again tempted. So that ruled that out.
What was that episode?
Well, that was just before I was going overseas, and we all thought we were going to be killed. And indeed, in my case, Jimmy was killed. And there was suddenly a great urge, which I suppose is biological, to procreate before you leave. But a lot of things went wrong, and that did not take place.
I mean, you take note of homosexual and heterosexual. Well, they're more of the former than the latter, but relationships with women as lovers?
Well, I don't make any labels for anybody. There's no such thing as a homosexual person, no such thing as a heterosexual person. Technically, I suppose we're all bisexual. But these are adjectives, not nouns. They describe actions. Yes, there's a homosexual action, and some people like to commit them all the time. There are heterosexual actions, and people sometimes are exclusively that, sometimes not. There is no such thing as a person. It's like saying because you like to eat potatoes and I'm on brown rice, hey, I want you to meet Charlie Rose. He's a friend of mine. He's a potato guy, you know, potato guy. I'm brown rice myself. And I've got a very good doctor who get you off those potatoes, you know, if you were ever serious about it.
Or they would say, this is Charlie Rose, he's a potato eater. And I mean, he's a potato eater, and I'm...
Yes, and I'm rice man.
But here is Howard Auster, here in this photograph, who still lives with you in Ravello, in Italy. No, I'm interested in relationships here.
I gather you're interested in relationships here.
Well, but the point is that you write about this.
Yes, I do.
You know, there's no sex here. This is something else. This is a companionship. This is what?
Well, I think if I have any lesson to the troops, never mix friendship and sex. I have sometimes made a friend of someone I've had sex with, but very, very seldom. I never have sex with friends. I think one of the things in the world of the young marrieds, which is so disastrous and leads to 50% of them getting divorced, is they go to bed with each other's husbands and wives. They go to bed with people they know. They make terrible messes because there are children involved. It's all right if it's just a twosome, a threesome, a foursome. I think that's unfair to families, and I much prefer the more direct way that you have your sex here and you have your friendships here. Elaine Dundee was a marvelous novelist. It's very funny about that. In the book, she wrote The Dud Avocado, and about how, although Dawn Powell would always say, when somebody's such a marvelous novelist, great wit, and she used to say, I've only been to bed with perhaps 20 men in my life. Well, we were counting up once, and we'd got to about 50, and she said, I do not count the times that I was betrayed by alcohol.
You say that your passion is mostly for reading other people's books and creating sentences for yourself.
That's it.
That's what you want to do.
And that is what I did do.
Do you share the opinion of most people about what is your best work? I mean, they talk about Lincoln, they talk about Myra Breckinridge, they talk about the first book that was so controversial.
I don't think much about I don't rate myself very much.
But you know what you like. I mean, do you like them all equally, or do you recognize that sometimes you do better, or you strike a chord that resonates more?
Well, sometimes you have more fun with something. I mean, a book like Duluth or Myra Breckinridge, it's the ones that make me laugh I like the best, and the ones that are pure invention. Historical novels are like breaking rock. I mean, that involves scholarship, and you've got to get it right, or as right as you can. And I call those reflections. I'm reflecting upon the origins of Christianity as through the eyes of the Emperor Julian, the apostate, or in the 5th century B.C. creation, where I meditate upon Confucius, the Buddha, Socrates, and Zoroaster. I'm teaching myself, and I hope that I'm being instructive and useful to others. It's worthwhile doing. It's hard work. It's very hard work, and I don't think I could probably ever do anything like that again. When I get going with a Myra Breckinridge, I am Myra Breckinridge whom no man shall possess. This voice came booming to me. I don't know where it came from. And I was off and running, and it wasn't until I was halfway through the book I realized that she'd been a man. This is the fun of writing. Now,
You didn't know until you were halfway there?
Halfway through. Well, her voice was all wrong, you know. Yeah. And then I suddenly realized, oh, this is somebody with a sex change.
Now, who played in the movie? Was it Raquel Welch?
Raquel, yes. Who, if they'd had a director, you know, she might have done a very good job, but it was sabotage, alas, from the beginning.
Do you think that what you have achieved as a literary figure, as a writer, is primarily the force of your intellect or the force of your energy?
Well, energy without which there is nothing. So I am genetically very sound. I come from an energetic family. I came from a family that refused ever to, the main line of it, at least those that I admired in the family, to accept defeat. My grandfather was blind at the age of 10, and he had vowed he was going to go to the Senate, which was an important place in those days. And he got there at the age of 38, not being able to read.
And you would read to him?
And I read to him as a kid and was brought up in his house. And I never, ever felt sorry for myself because I would think of him. You know, I had two eyes at least. So I had these examples in front of me of people who had overcome quite a lot. So I was, that combined with energy will get you quite a ways. Beyond that, you have to deal sort of with what most excites you. And I was they did a retrospective yesterday at the Museum of Broadcasting and Television, whatever it's called. And I was watching some of my old television plays, yeah. And what are they called? One is called A Sense of Justice. Nobody would call anything that today. Who has a sense of justice today? Certainly not the Supreme Court. Another one was called Honor, Civil War story. Who on earth would go on about honor? And here I was in my late 20s, early 30s, obsessed with these themes. Justice, honor, what is the state? What rights has the state against the individual? What rights does the individual have against the state? And I don't know, maybe it's being brought up in the house of a populist politician, but I knew where I stood very early, and I knew what I cared about, and I knew that no one was going to shut me up, not even the New York Times. And I never took no for an answer.
Yeah. Well, you never took no, and you've continued. Have you achieved what you, I mean, how far along are you to achieving what you wanted to do and creating what you wanted to create and doing what you wanted to do in this life at 70?
Well, I suppose I would like earlier to have been president, but now I see that I know too much about it now. It's a pointless job. We talk about the coming election. Nobody basically cares about it because everybody knows the country isn't, nothing works. The system doesn't work, so the individual doesn't matter. Had I been president about the time one of my numerous political cousins, Jimmy Carter, was the president, something might have been done in the world. But by then, everything was blocked, blocked. So that ambition sputtered out long ago. I thought it was better to reflect upon the presidency in books like Empire and Hollywood and Burr, Lincoln. So as for the work itself, you do your best.
What are you proudest of? The novels, the essays, the what?
I don't know that I'm really proud of anything.
You don't know that you're really proud of anything? I mean,
well, no, you never do it as well as you ought to do it. I think that in my lifetime I have made people look at sex and at the American Republic in new ways that they would not have looked at these two great subjects had I not been around. I have changed, every now and then, I have changed the discourse. I said it, just one silly example, 1968, the conversations with William Buckley on television at the conventions. The very first debate we had, 1968, the Republican convention, Miami Beach, I said there is no difference between the two parties. Each is paid by the same people, paid for. Explosion, how can you say such a thing? Hysteria on every side.
On every side, or you mean by Bill?
Oh, Bill. Hysteria. Hysteria is at home, always there, but I'm speaking more of what goes on.
You mean it ricocheted off the country, people saying,
How
who
dare
is
he
this?
say that? There's all the
Who
difference
is
in the
this
world.
writer saying that presidents are for sale and owned by corporate America?
Yeah, and they said, you know, the party of labor, the Democrats, the party of the rich, the Republicans. There is not one single major politician today who does not repeat what I said in '68. But there is fundamentally no difference between the two parties.
No,
so much
true.
so the Republicans are breaking up. They know that, so they have their Gingrich and the Christian right. They have their little splinter.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that now there was just a story in the New York Times, which you admire so much,
Very much, yes.
about President Clinton and the success that his campaign is having in the last 6 months is because he's co-opting the Republican positions and moving to the center.
Well, he's a perfectly good politician, but they are committing seppuku, I believe is the correct
Japanese.
Yeah, they're committing suicide. I mean, there is no party there.
What's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, let me think. I'm trying to do a movie about the Alger Hiss case in Whittaker Chambers.
New information suggests Chambers.
Chambers was indeed working for the Russians. I think that was accepted.
No. That Hiss was working for the Russians.
Well,
not that Chambers was working.
The newest I haven't seen.
Okay.
But next, the penultimate newest was indeed when that general in Moscow said, well, we can't find him in the files.
Right.
But we know if their files are as big a mess as Langley's files, they may never find anything. But I always thought it's sort of unlikely, but I leave it open. I mean, the case was never solved. But I want to bring in, if it can be done, the gods on Olympus. I want Harry Truman in there and Dean Acheson cooking up, restoring the draft, militarizing the economy, instituting loyalty oaths, having the draft in peacetime, something that never happened before. This was very bold. This was revolutionary. And my friend David McCullough, a great man, wonderful writer, does a biography of Harry Truman and misses the entire point to his political career.
Which was?
The Cold War. He institutionalized it. He put it into place. And Jack Kennedy fell for it. He believed in it. He wanted to win it. Now, at least Truman was cynical, and Acheson was fairly cynical. Jack was a kind of a believer. We'll bear any burden, and so forth and so on. And he was going to do that. Well, that meant war, and war would be a very bad thing for the world. And he gives us the missile crisis, which is a moment in which we could have all gone up.
Jack gave us the missile crisis. I mean, I think Mr. DeBrennan suggested on this program that Khrushchev gave us the missile crisis by putting the missiles
by putting them in yes.
Cuba.
But then Jack's response to it was they were ready to go to. I have in there in the book, I made notes about when the Berlin Wall went up. I was at Hyannisport, staying at the compound, near the compound, going every day to have meals, and we're really on the verge of war over Berlin. And Jack was I must say he was schizophrenic. I mean, at one moment he says, I'm a peace at any price guy. And the next moment he's talking about war, nuclear war. And Jackie was in a rage about it. She didn't quite say, you know, you goddamn men, but that is what she meant. You don't seem to care. The children are going to die too. And she really got impassioned over this. And then you duck, and that's, you know, it's not that bad, you know, kind of thing. But I have in this book, I made 13 single-spaced notes of what we talked about every day, and it should make your hair stand on end.
Gore Vidal, a memoir, Palimpsest. Thank you. Pleasure. We'll be right back. Stay with us.